What is going on, gunfighters? A lot of talk about levers lately got me thinking about rival cartridges and lever actions. We did a little survey on the Patreon chat of what cartridge you would like to see in lever actions. The big one now, the big hotness, the cool hot thing is 4570, the Buffalo Killer, man. It'll drop a Velociraptor in its tracks. Forget about the fact that actual Velociraptors, I think, were about the size of turkeys. But whatever, it's Hollywood, right? So that's the new hot thing, marketing. But we think it's bad now, and I would submit that it is. We live in a very litigious society where lawyers run things and everything. But I actually think it might have been worse in the late 80s, early 90s, going into the early aughts. We had an assault weapons ban in this country. We also had, you saw things creep in like magazine safeties in a lot of guns. Like if you take the magazine out, the gun won't fire. That sounds like a great idea. We also saw things like the locking system in revolvers, which had been deemed safe for 100 years or so thereabouts. And now all of a sudden you need a lock in them, which is where you get the Smith & Wesson like lock, no lock kind of thing. We also saw like magazines that held over 10 rounds stamped for military and law enforcement only because, you know, as a mere civilian, you're not qualified to have an 11-round magazine. 10 rounds, you're fine. 11 rounds, super dangerous. So we think of that as being big today, but I think it might have been worse back then. I think people kind of had enough of that. Anyway, how does this tie into the 4570, though? Like, come on, what are we talking about? We went from dinosaurs to lawyers? Well, let me explain. The 4570, when it originally came out, I think the max pressure was somewhere in the 18,000 PSI kind of range. That's pretty pedestrian. That's a real low pressure round. And I think maybe people were a little bit leery to just say, hey, let's load it up hotter. Because, you know, you can, don't do this, but you can, if you have a 357 Magnum pressure gun, you can totally load up a 38 Special. There's enough powder capacity in there to fit 357 Magnum powder charges easily and still have room to spare. The reason they made the 357 Magnum longer is so you don't put it in an old, 1800s model 38 Special and blow up in your face. They don't, I guess, trust you to have enough knowledge to not do that. That may have been the same reason they made the 22 Magnum a different diameter than the 22 long rifle, so you don't shove it into an older gun and blow the gun up. But here of late, there have been companies loading up hotter 4570. But, a decade or more ago, that wasn't the case. Companies weren't as willing to go out on a limb and load up hot 4570 because they thought somebody might shove a buffalo bore load in a trap door and blow the gun up, which probably will happen, or would very easily damage the gun. But not a lot of people are running around shooting trap doors, and the people that are probably know better. And I guess, thankfully, companies, ammo companies, gun companies realize that. So they loaded the 4570 up hotter. But again, it wasn't always so. Which brings us to the cartridges we're going to talk about today. The 450 Marlin. How do you make 4570 manlier? Well, you don't add chest hair to it. You don't give it a lower voice. What you do is you put a belt on it, because belted magnums are hot. They're not so hot right now, but belted magnums were hot in the 90s and the early aughts and before. It was like you want a hot cartridge, you put a belted magnum. So 450 Marlin, it's like a hot belted magnum 4570, and it's still that. And I wish they'd have kind of just, I don't think that you can, but I wish they'd have just put a belt on the 4570 so that you could load old 4570 loads, but you couldn't load the new 450 Marlin. It would be like one-way interchangeable. I don't think that they're interchangeable at all. But they could have designed it that way, but they didn't. But the 450 Marlin is basically a really hot 4570, if you want to think of it that way. It's not, I don't think, based on that brass, because it's a belted Magnum case. But a 450 Marlin is a powerhouse of a cartridge. It's a hot 4570. And that was kind of, I think, Marlin's idea of how do we take the 4570 and give it a modern amount of pressure and powder. The other one is 444. Also, I didn't realize also a Marlin cartridge, the 444 Marlin. So imagine that, much like you took the 45 long Colt, you lengthened it to 454 Casull, and they did that for a similar reason, so you didn't hot load a 45 long Colt and blow up an old Colt single action army. But you get the 454 Casull, you lengthen it more, you get the 460. Well, imagine if you did that with the 44 Special and you got the 44 Rem Mag, and then you lengthened it even more and made it even more powerful. That would be the 444 Marlin. The 440 Marlin, the 444 Marlin is a powerhouse. It is a stump puller of a cartridge. It is a beast. Came out in 1984. It's a beast of a cartridge. As you might imagine, it's not a 45 diameter bullet. It's a 44 diameter bullet, and 44 like 44 Rem Mag is not actually 44 caliber. It's 42 caliber, .429 caliber. That's what caliber 44 Magnum is. Think of it as a really long, beefy 44 Magnum. And looking up some ballistics here, this is from Wikipedia to give credit where credit is due. You're looking at a 240 grain, which is a classic 44 Rem mag load. You're looking at a 240 grain at 2350 for velocity for 2,900 foot-pounds. You're looking at a 300 grain bullet at 2,000 feet a second for 266 foot-pounds. And since I didn't give you that, let me go back and give you that for the 450 Marlin. So going back to the 450 Marlin, let's take a look at those numbers just real quick on the Wikipedia. Keep it even. I like to use equal weights and equal measures. What does it list? It lists a 430 grain at 1,900 feet a second for 3446 foot-pounds, and a 325 grain FTX at 2,225 for 3,572 foot-pounds. So, when you compare these two cartridges, you're kind of comparing sledgehammers, and you're driving like 10 penny nails. Does it really matter if you're driving a 10 penny nail with a 8-pound sledge or a 10-pound sledge or a 12-pound sledge? They're all kind of overkill for most things. So pick whichever one you like. And again, today the easy choice is 4570. It's the most available. Those, when they started hot loading the 4570, it made these other rounds less relevant. They're still good rounds. There's a lot of really good rounds that are really obscure. And there's nothing wrong with them ballistically. It's just mostly the availability. But if you're a hand loader, hand loading opens up a whole other world, right? If you hand load, it's not going to be that expensive once you get the brass to load 444. Really not much more expensive than it would be for 44 Magnum. But when they started hot loading the 4570, people kind of looked at these and went, well, what's the point? There really isn't one, because I can shoot the cheaper powder puff kind of cowboy action original OG 18,000 something PSI 4570 loads, and it's not going to beat me up, and I can load them hot because they weren't, I don't think, willing to do that back in the day, but they are now. Anyway, just some really cool cartridges I thought I would talk about. I hear some of the kids out there of the patrons like the cartridge talk, so I figured I'd throw some more out there. I appreciate you guys. I appreciate all that you do. Tactical tip of the day. You should know to always clean your guns, more or less, the direction the bullet travels from back to front. That's almost always the way that you do it. If it's like a Marlin lever action, it's not that hard to take the bolt out. If it's something like a Winchester, it is a giant pain in the butt to take a bolt out. So you can't really do that unless you get a bore snake. That's my number one recommendation. These are pretty low pressure rounds. Even with the hotter pressures, you're still talking like 30-something thousand PSI as opposed to like 65,000 PSI in a modern bottleneck Spitzer cartridge like a 270. Right, so lower pressure cartridges, you can probably get by with a bore snake. I don't think that I've ever seen so many rounds, unless the people were shooting just straight lead rounds, to a lever action where you needed some kind of really aggressive jag in the bore. So just pull a bore snake through it. That's the quick, easy solution. If you need more than that, get not the cheap aluminum 3-piece cleaning rods. Just don't do that. Just don't clean the gun. You're probably better off, unless you have, a rock stuck in the bore, to just not clean the gun at all. Then use one of those cheap 3-piece aluminum cleaning rods. Get a good 1-piece stainless steel coated cleaning rod. That's what you do. Don't try to save a few bucks with your Walmart cleaning kit and for $10 and ruin a $1,000 gun. That's not a bargain. Get a good one-piece coated cleaning rod with the appropriate size jag. And if you have to clean from the muzzle, get one with a muzzle guide. They make them with a muzzle guide that you put in the crown. It's like a piece of polymer, Teflon, plastic, whatever. It goes in the crown and you guide it down the bore. If you absolutely have to, that's how you clean from the muzzle. Anyway, that's your tactical tip of the day, your tactical verse of the day. And these words which I command you today shall be in your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and you shall talk of them when you sit in your house and when you walk by the way, when you lie down and when you rise up. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. Men, I appreciate you listening. As much as we might talk in this kind of community, and probably your and my political leanings of not liking big government, it's not government's responsibility to teach your kids right and wrong. That's your responsibility. So I hope that we are doing that. With that, thanks for listening, and have a blessed day.